how we've been doing it. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot right at the moment, because the things when I did the blueprint, because I brought in an old exam and it still like met the requirements of evidence-based practice and QI, but it's kind of scattered how I did the blueprint. So I'll just kind of talk through things, and I may ask you a couple of questions. Let's see, somebody asked me a chat. Okay. All right. So John and Carlos are off camera, and that's fine. Actually, several people are off camera, and that's okay. Unless I call your name, then I'd like to see your face. And so I've got the recording going. So now I will share the screen. And what I want is, so how we're going to do this is I've got a little PowerPoint that we'll go through, and I'll do most of the talking. I know that stresses you out because you guys want to talk too, but just unmute if you want to talk.
We don't.
I know you'd much rather not be put on the spot. I get that part. I was being a little facetious there. And then if you see somebody or hear, because I get into what I'm doing. So if somebody's trying to get on and they text you and say, I'm trying to get on, please tell me so that I can let them in. Because, I don't want them to miss this fun and excitement of me talking. And anyway, at the end, I have a little game that we're going to do. So that's how you're going to interact. And you can do it on your computer or on your phone, and it's called Socrative. And my husband is very nicely, before I start, he's bringing me a nice little Diet Pepsi, probably even a cherry Diet Pepsi, because he went to Wawa. That's all right. So there's his hand and the Wawa cup. So at least I'll be hydrated. Thank you. I don't think they saw you, so it's all good. All right, so we have a nice little game that we'll do on Socrative, and I'll walk you through how to do that in a few minutes. And what I'll do is after the fact, because you're going to take it's quiz formatted for Socrative. It's similar to Kahoots if you've done that. And so what I'll do after the fact, after we're done here, is I will I'll open it as a quiz so you can go back in and do it as many times as you want. It's got like 15 practice questions. So what is evidence-based practice? Well, what evidence-based, I'll just talk. So what is evidence-based practice is what we found is sometimes what we were doing wasn't working. We were like saying using a medication because the manufacturer said it worked. Well, in fact, what we started doing is looking at the evidence. Is the evidence there that says it works? And evidence-based practice takes into account patient preferences, but it also takes into account the research and clinical experience. And you guys have heard these stories before, that we did studies or they, did a clinical trial on the medication, and some of the side effects weren't known because the number of people studied weren't enough, or they didn't study it in that particular population. And so then we found that when we studied it in a particular population, that there were problems. The other thing that's more about the QI, so I'll get to that. So we use it to improve outcomes, and nurses implement evidence-based care because it provides credibility to the profession, right? We don't just do things just because. We do things because there's evidence behind that, or at least most things that we do. It's used to form a bridge between research and nursing care. You guys know I'm working on my doctorate, or maybe you don't, and I'm in the middle of my dissertation, and I'm in the middle of the research process. And why am I researching? Well, what I'm researching, I'll just tell you so that you can be in awe, and I'm just kidding about that part. I'm researching, why do we graduate students? Because nursing school is hard, right? Nursing school is hard. You had to jump over hoops to get in it. You have to have so many prerequisites. You have to do the TEAS test. You have to do all those things that are challenging to you. So that are a challenge, period, no matter who the student is. And then you get through nursing school, and yet still about 15% of students or graduates fail the NCLEX, fail the licensing exam. So are there any academic predictors? That's what I'm studying. But in order to provide evidence or provide statistical significance, I have to have a certain number of participants and I have to follow a regimented process. And that's what research is. And so when I'm done my study, if I find there's a statistical significance for something that could have predicted that a student would fail the NCLEX, that we could have looked at sooner and been able to identify them sooner, then that's going to maybe change how our admission process is or whatever. And one study won't do that. And that's what we look at with evidence-based care. One study isn't usually enough. We need to look at more studies to say, yeah, this is great. Now, we look at anecdotal evidence, like we know that repositioning patients helps postoperatively, helps to prevent pneumonia. We randomly said at some point we need to turn them every 2 hours. Well, we know that when somebody's getting an advanced disease called ARDS, that they need to be turned every 30 minutes or even more frequently. Well, so evidence has shown that they need more frequent turning. I'm not quite on the screen, so you're not seeing all my hand motions and all of that. So evidence has shown us that, but it takes several studies and then deep dive on research to show that. So the components of evidence-based practice are, there's a knowledge that's gained in practice, and that's what I'm saying, that we see that I wasn't turning that patient enough, and so we know that we need to turn them more frequently. In the research of other studies, and then preferences to the patient. It's similar to the nursing process, so because it follows a specific scientific process. But the nursing process deals with the care of the patient in a holistic way, where evidence-based practice looks at a specific clinical question. And when we're considering patient preferences, it helps to reflect the values, the needs, the interests, and the choices of the patient. And nursing participates to contribute to the knowledge of nursing and patient care. So I didn't do a good snippet. This is a snippet from the back of the evidence-based practice chapter. And I don't remember I didn't get the number, but it talks about barriers to implementation, because that's one of the things. I was a educator in the hospital, and you probably already know this, but nurses don't like to change. And hospitals change all the time based on evidence, based on the availability of equipment, and there's a lot of things. So there are barriers to implementation, and some of them are internal. I don't like to change. I don't like change. I've done it this way my whole life. I don't want to change. And it's kind of the thoughts that the processes aren't going to work. And then there's external barriers, like resistance to change or no support from management or a personal aversion to the idea. And then there's some other barriers that work and schedule demands, workload demands, patient preferences that might conflict with best practice. And you can read the list. I'm not going to read that to you. But one example in current practice is before the pandemic, so back in February, if you would have worn a mask outside the patient's room, you would have been written up about that. And they would have told you about OSHA and how you could get fined for wearing PPE outside of the patient room unless it was a mask because you hadn't had your flu shot. Now that you would be written up for not wearing a mask out of the patient's room. So the evidence or current practice because of COVID has changed how we're practicing. So evidence-based practice is fluid. And this external factor, while maybe our heads are still saying, I don't want to wear a mask outside the patient room, we had to make a change based on what current evidence was showing us. So the research process, well, evidence is derived from research, and most of evidence-based practice is based on studies. And so sometimes we're teaching patients and they have questions, and your family has questions because you're a nurse, and so your family says, what's best practice? So one of the best resources that is evidence-based that patients have access to is Healthy People 2020. Now, when I was creating your evidence-based practice assignment that you have, the paper you have to write at the end, I looked to see if we actually now had Healthy People 2030, and that's not available yet. It's still 2020. But that's evidence-based practice that you can actually refer patients to. The American Nurses Association expects that all nurses will integrate research into your care. And so that is not, I read a study and I think that this is the best practice. It's things like we're repositioning patients, we're doing early ambulation. And those types of care that we do for patients are usually research-based. We look at part of the research or the evidence-based practice does look at what PICO is. The main thing that I want you to focus on as you prepare for the exam is what are interventions. But the PICO process is the population or the problem, the intervention, comparisons, outcomes, and then the time of the study. One of the other things that we look at is when you're looking at research, what gives us the gold standard? What is the gold standard of research studies? And those are the randomized control studies. So when physicians are implementing new medication protocols, they're looking for randomized control studies. So we all know, because hopefully you have at least 10 minutes to watch the news or scroll through the news on your Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media that you're doing, that there was a push to use medications for COVID patients that were the hydroxychloroquine. And the scientists and the doctors were saying we can't push those medications because we haven't done studies on those in this particular thing. We know they're safe for treating patients with malaria. We know they're safe for treating some autoimmune things like lupus, but we don't know that they're safe in this situation. And what the scientists were looking for were randomized controls trials. And so scientists, those trials are underway now to say whether they work or they don't work. Now, one of the big things with a research study is that participants must consent to being part of the study. There's other parts they have to be explained about the study, any risks to them, and they can withdraw at any time. But that's part of the consent process. They consent to be part of a study. I've been a nurse a long time, and I've been part of when patients participate in that and part of that consent process. Now, back to me for a moment, and I will say that I chose to do the study that I'm doing for my dissertation so that I'm just looking at records. I'm not looking at students having to consent to the study, because it was just, records are a lot easier to get the approval on looking at. Just FYI, that's not relevant to you or your exam. And implementing research once I'm just trying to think of how I want to say this. So once, if your facility is part of a research study, so like if you're at Tampa General, they do a lot of research at Tampa General. They will tell you, and you'll have to look for consents, that this is happening, that there's a study going on. But other things, so like you might say, let's say you work on an orthopedic floor and you've learned about a new treatment or a new treatment or a new way of doing ambulating, let's say, although that sounds weird, but a new way of pneumonia or DVT prevention. Let's go with that. So you've learned of a new way for DVT prophylaxis prevention, and you want to implement that. So there's a process that you have to follow. You can't just as a nurse say, oh, I heard this and let's try it. You want to go through your manager and through your educator to say, hey, have you seen that? And see if you can make a change that way. And that's part of how you implement research. And I put implementation twice. And when you're in the implementation phase of the research, one of the things that you're looking at is it's most helpful when you're evaluating the outcome of care. So if you're looking at, let's say, that new DVT prophylaxis, you're looking at preventing DVT and you're looking at how are you going to know if this is working, you want to look at the outcomes. Lastly, I think for evidence-based practice, let me see, then I'm going into QI, is there's a lot of resources, and one of those, like I said, is already, I talked about this, is Healthy People 2020. And the other thing is that you're looking at integrative medicine, and one of those integrative medicine is complementary and alternative medicines. So we look at things like meditation and deep breathing, well, I'll stick with meditation, or yoga, or things like that, that help to integrate care. And that's part of evidence-based practice, is integrative medicine. And it includes interprofessional approaches. All right, so moving on. Any questions about that before I move on to QI? I don't know how to see the chat while I'm in full screen. So I don't see any hands raised. All right.
Quick question. Question for you.
Okay.
Now, do you think your research may present some barriers to future students, entering the nursing program? Because I mean, there are a bunch of hurdles already, especially some of the prerequisites. Some places don't require microbiology, but HCC does. Do you think additional barriers is a good idea that may result from the study?
So what I'm looking at is, I don't want to look at it as barriers, Carlos. What I'm looking at is, how do we support you better? So if we know that having to repeat the TEAS test is a barrier to entry, and then we want to be able to support you on that. So what I mean by that is, maybe we provide you tools earlier, or like, let's say failing a med-surg course, let's say that, and having to repeat the med-surg course, because that's what I'm looking at. It is repeating it. Is that reflective of failure on NCLEX? And with that, what I'm thinking, or what my, because that's part of the whole dissertation process, you have to make your recommendations. Mine would be, how do I support the student better? Not how do I prevent the student from entering, but how do we provide better supports?
Okay, no, I can understand that.
Yeah. The statistician that I spoke to said, well, no, you have to say they can't come in. Oh, no, this is community college, and we would never say that. I think that it needs to be more about supports. And I don't know what those supports look like, but
that was my concern of just additional hurdles.
Yeah. No, I don't think that anybody needs additional hurdles. I think there's enough. And it's because it's my doctorate's a doctorate in education, and it is based on the Bandura theory of self-efficacy, which means that when you get a good grade on, we know that students that are successful, that make A's, do better. And so why is it that you've been able to overcome these barriers, all these hurdles, rather, not barriers, but hurdles, and then still fail NCLEX? Should you have not built up enough self-confidence that you can be confident in NCLEX? So that's what I'm looking at. But I think that then we put more supports in. That's my opinion. And that I appreciate that you actually thought that my research would go somewhere. Thank you, Carlos, for that. Okay.
You're welcome.
So anyway, the QI process. Now you all work through the QI process. So with doing your, getting your study or your, whatever the assignment was, the group assignment. So again, like evidence-based practice, the QAI process is to improve patient outcomes. It's based on, we've had some type of QI process for decades, but at the beginning of, in 2000, there was a study that was the Institute of Medicine, and it was to err as human, but it found that we were making a lot of medical errors. And so what we had was an environment of blame, and what they said we need to do is have a blame-free environment, because they call it the Swiss cheese model. So if you think about what a chunk of Swiss cheese looks like, however they make Swiss cheese, there's holes in it. But the Swiss cheese model said that sometimes what happens is something goes all the way through, there's a hole that goes all the way through. And so we need to look at systematic problems or systemic problems that improve patient outcomes. And so that's what came out of this. It's errors are supposed to be blame free. You're not supposed to be afraid to to report an error. Now, I will say, you heard my qualifier of supposed to be, but that is what the system is designed to be, is blame free. But I know that that's still always not true. Adverse events are prevented by double checking, two client IDs, administering so one thing that can cause an adverse event is if you're administering medications with the same active ingredient or the same action at the same time. That can lead to an adverse event. So like if I give 2 antihypertensives at 9 a.m., I could cause the patient to have a dropped blood pressure, right? Or if I give 2 medications, let's say I give Tylenol and I give a medication like Vicodin that has Tylenol in it, at the same time, I could cause too much Tylenol at one time. So that's one of the reasons that cause for an adverse event. There's a strong relationship between the concept of QI and this concept of informatics, because informatics is looking at the documentation part of it, and quality improvement does take the documentation as part of it. So a lot of you have seen rapid response teams or sepsis alerts. Sepsis alert is a QI process because we know that patients getting sepsis have poor outcomes. And so what they did as part of a QI study is they said, but we know that somebody with sepsis is going to have tachycardia and a change in their blood pressure to a low blood pressure and a high fever and maybe a high white count and maybe a low fever. And so it takes that whole informatics system and it looks at that data, and that's how you get a sepsis alert on your computer. It's part of a QI process. Medication errors, I sort of talked about with that blame-free environment, but what happens is nurses sometimes are afraid of that blame, and so they don't report. And sometimes they don't report is their fear of being blamed, their fear of being punished for them making the error. They might forget, and they're embarrassed that they made the error. So that's part of it. Quality management is used to improve the experience of patient care, population, and the value of the care. And I forgot to say on the previous slide that one example of the QI process or why we do it is that I'm talking around it, but what I want to say is one thing that we look at is reducing readmissions. And that's one big thing that hospitals look at, because the hospital doesn't get reimbursed for a readmission. So you're using the QI process so that you're making sure that patients that get discharged know what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to report things, etc., because it's costly to the system if a patient gets readmitted. So now back to this slide. So I said what quality management is, and one of the first tasks in QI, so if you're tasked with, as I did, I tasked you with creating a QI process or a process for managing the 2 patient falls a week for 12 weeks. And we know that, or 3 patient falls a week, that's way too many falls. That would have really caused red alarms to go off. But I wanted to make it extreme so that you had some stuff to work with. So, but one of the first things that you do is you form a QI team, a continuous quality improvement team, to define what the desired outcomes. And that's what I did when I assigned you that group assignment. You were the quality improvement team. You want to evaluate the effectiveness, and then a hallmark of total quality management is it uses teamwork throughout the organization. So here's one of the things that is confusing, I'll say, in the chapter, is the similarity of the terms. So you see, I want you to make sure that you look up the difference between quality management, quality assurance, and continuous quality improvement. And then, or quality, yes, I said that already. And so one of the other things is that when you're looking at the effectiveness, so how did that change happen, or how well was it implemented? That's the quality assurance process. So we're looking at that. Now, there is a national quality strategy, and that includes better care, healthy people in healthy communities, and affordable cares. Now, this is just an exam taking tip. So I'm showing you this slide that's just a little cutout from your book, a little snippet from your book, and it has 3 points that I made. What kind of question do you think would come from that?
Select all that apply.
A select all that apply. It's not just going to have those 3 points, is it, Cheryl?
No.
But those are the 3 points that I want you to know, like to be able to identify.
Got it.
All right, and a chart audit. So chart audit is part of the QI process, and you guys did a chart audit. That was the thing I was getting the most emails about because of how the group assignment was set up. Where do I put this? Because I keep stumping it out. And I got a lot of emails about that. But I was able to find everybody's. But I had no way of like showing you what I was seeing because all you would see is what came on your screen. Anyway, aside from that, what kind of chart audit did you do? A retrospective audit or a concurrent audit?
A retrospective.
Retrospective. Who said that?
Carlos.
Carlos. Okay. So what made it retrospective?
Because it was after discharge and not while the patient was in the hospital.
Exactly. So I want you to know the difference. Concurrent is when the patient's in the hospital, and retrospective is once they are gone. All right, so you guys are going to go to Socrative.com. That's what we're going to do next. And you're going to go to this, when you get there, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so I can share the other one. When you get there, it's going to say enter teacher room or enter teacher code. And the teacher code is 526084 when you get there. I'm going to share a different screen right now, which is Socrative, so I can see that. All right, and so 526084. And so when you get there, I have to like move you from here so I can see how many people are signed on. All right, so I'm waiting for people to sign on. And so once you get there, you're going to be assigned a team. It's a space race. I didn't do anything creative except for make you rockets. Sometimes I make you bears or unicorns or bumblebees, I think is my other choice. When you get there, it's going to ask you, so one person is on. So when you get there, you'll be automatically assigned to a team. And you'll know that by the color in your background, whether you're blue, magenta, lime, or peach. All right, I'm waiting for people. One person is in. Two people are in. And then once you're in, then you can start answering questions because you'll get the questions. But I think there's about at least 10 people on our Zoom. maybe 12, 14 people. I'm probably one of them. So 13 people. So I should see 13 people, and I got 4. And whoever is in the Lime team leaped into the lead. All right, we're up to 7. You can do this on your phone, or you can do this on the computer. All right, Lime team. Go Lime team.
Nurse should check for them.
And one of the things about the space race, so you're just randomly assigned, but let's say you're on the blue team and you got the first question wrong. Whoever else comes in the blue team behind you, if they get it right, it advances the rocket. Peach team and Magenta are chasing after Lime. We got 9 people on. All right, somebody's chatting with me. Okay, so Tony, you can't get on. Kat, did you figure it out?
School.
All right, so go to Socrative.com. Do you want me to put the link in the class on the announcements?
DVD is the latest trend in healthcare.
Peach team took the lead. All right, everybody else is tied for second. Peach team is in the lead. If you're struggling getting on, I'll post what I said I would do is I'll make it a quiz. And I'll post it not for points, but I'll post anyway, the making it a quiz part is on my end. I'll post it so you can do it on your own too afterwards.
DVD.
Whoa, Peach team is leaping ahead. All right, Peach and Magenta, you're tied. Woo, Magenta team. Who was on the Magenta team? All right, Cheryl raised her hand. Tony raised his hand. Okay. Everybody can keep going. It'll say on there waiting for next teacher activity, and I don't have another activity, so you can log out when you're done. But I'll wait for everybody to be done, and then we'll go over it.
Will we be able to get into this again, like after class is out?
Yeah, I'll post the link to it, and you can then take it as many times as you want, Monica. And the direct, like the room code. Were you able to get in, Monica?
Just for a brief moment. It's my laptop though. I know what it is.
Oh, okay.
I need to get a new one.
Yeah. I just gave up, and I said earlier to people that we have done everything with the Wi-Fi, and so I've just decided that if I'm Zooming with class, that I just can't be wireless. I have a and so you're not here, like I'm just actually coming in without any static that I can tell. All right, Lime team came in second. Anybody still on the blue team hanging out? Anybody still taking it?
Should we get off?
You're still taking it, Sylvia?
No, you said, I thought you said we should get off, right?
If you're done, you can log off, but I don't want to go to the results until everybody's had a chance to do it that wants to.
Okay.
So if you're still taking it, that's fine. Just let
Okay.
me know who's anybody. Kat, were you able to get on?
There's a low channel.
Jasmine, did you do it?
Yes. Yes, I did it.
You're done?
Yes.
Okay, Ellie, what about you? Done? Okay.
Yeah, I'm done.
I just don't want to log anybody off in the middle. Herbert, are you done?
Yes.
Okay. Carlos?
Yeah, I finished. I completed.
All right. Anybody still doing it? All right.
Yes,
so I'm
I'm
going to.
still doing it.
Who is?
Yeah,
Antoinette.
Okay. All right. So Antoinette, you tell me when you're done, okay?
I'm done.
Okay. All right. So I'll finish this and then we'll go over the questions. All right, so now you can see the correct answers. So quality assurance is implemented in the evaluation phase. Actually, what I should just ask you, so did you have any questions or about what the answers were? Let me ask you that question instead of going. How did you do on it?
I got one wrong, but I don't remember which one it was.
Oh, okay. All right.
I got a couple wrong because I just thought that there were just too many correct or true answers, you know.
Okay. All right. So root cause analysis to prevent problem recurrence. When you're looking at evidence as part of nursing care, you want to make sure it's valid evidence, reliable, and useful. And that goes back to that when we were talking about the randomized control trials and implementing, like we see all this right now in our COVID and what we're doing. And one person saying we're going to have a vaccine, and the manufacturers saying, well, we're trying, but we're not sure. And then whether or not there's studies that promote that. And so that's about validity and reliability and usefulness. So you wouldn't implement something just because your friend said on Facebook, this is really good. You really want to look for the evidence. It's a continuous process, evidence is, and it's a framework and a set of tools that the nurse can use. It's not the latest trend, because you know what? Even Florence Nightingale actually implemented evidence-based practice. She found that if she washed her hands, that it was reduced the amount of infections. This is an exam hint. So you probably haven't even had a test that included Florence Nightingale, and this one does. And so I expect that nobody will get that question wrong. I talked about this already. The difference between nursing processes and evidence-based practice is nursing process is holistic, and evidence-based practice focuses on a clinical question. Readily available source, Healthy People 2020. Implementing evidence-based practice is most helpful when you're doing when you're evaluating the client's outcomes. That's a hard phrase to write, so I could see how that would be. I had trouble writing that, taking it from how I have it in the question to be just a little simple statement there. American Nurses Association expects the nurse will integrate research findings into nursing care. And when planning a quality management program, the purpose is to improve the experience of patient care. And that's what you guys did at your group project. You planned a quality management or quality improvement activity. A retrospective chart audit occurs when the patient's still in the hospital. That was false. Hospital wants to decrease readmission. And why? What's your desired outcome is you want to decrease cost of care. Now, your desired outcome is that the patient is doing better, but of the choices you're going to have, you also want to decrease the cost of care. Purpose of the QI process is to improve patient outcomes. Okay. Any questions for me? Stop sharing so I can see everybody that's on screen.
Are we able to, as students, go in there and create questions? Like if we wanted to make our own exam?
Yeah, you can create your own account because it's free. You don't want to go into the pro version of it, but it's free. You can create your own account. When I started it, and because I've been using Socrative for years, and so you can create anything you want, like Quizlet. You can do Quizlet that same way. What I like about Socrative, I have pros and cons of it, but what I like about it is that it allows that quiz kind of formatting. And one of the things when you do some kind of class activity, there's always those quick to raise their hands or blurt out answer students in class. You know them. You might be them. I might have been them. I might have children that are like, do your teachers ever say, anybody but Patrick? I have that kid. And so, that influences how other people answer the questions. So what Socrative did is you guys all were able to answer the questions, and you didn't know, you weren't swayed by how your friend was answering it or how that first person would answer it. And so that's what I like about Socrative. That's the pros. One of the tools when I'm doing in-person class now works similarly, except it gives the individual answer, so to speak. And it's called Plickers. And Plickers is also free. You can set up your own account and it's free. And what it would do, this is just kind of an example, is every student in the class would get a QR code. And so let's say I'm looking, I've got Cheryl and then Herbert and then Tony. Whatever your QR code was, let's say you thought the answer should be A. So Cheryl's A was here, but Herbert's A was here, and Tony's A was here. So you just hold up your card, and I would stand at the front of the room and scan the room. and get the answers, and it would come up on my screen and then we would look at, oh, well, nobody knew that answer, or everybody knew that answer. Nobody knew the one person that got it wrong, except that, you know how students are. Oh, that was me. I thought whatever. So it would be that true confession, but it also avoided that. So those are a couple of quizzing tools. I would prefer to do Plickers over Socrative, but I didn't know how to give you your own individual card online. So that's why I didn't do it that way.
That Flickr sounds like Kahoot.
It's similar to Kahoots, except you only needed the card. You didn't have to use your phone. So the negative of Socrative is you have to have a computer or a phone. So you have to have that to use that. Plickers, the only one who needed an app was me. I just stood at the front of the room, and students would ask me, oh my gosh, that's so cool. How does that work? I have no idea. I just think it works by magic. I don't, that was my answer. Magic. I don't know how it works. So I like that because you didn't need any technology. And then I could say to students, if you don't trust yourself to bring your card back, then I will keep your card. So hand it back to me. So anyway, that's that. Exam is on Monday. It opens at 6. It closes at 10. You have 40 questions, and you have 60 minutes from the time that you start. So plan your time accordingly.